learning framework. So this is part of a project that we are involved with, and there's a series of webinars that's part of this project, and so this is one of them. So we'll start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people as the traditional owners and custodians of your land, and pay respects to elders past, present and future. The idea of this seminar, of this webinar, is that it's part of an ongoing project, and there are several components which we'll keep you informed with as we go along. But today we're going to have a look at, an overview of trauma. You might have looked at this in other webinars, but I'm going to talk about this in the context of the early years learning framework, the 3 themes, and of course the learning outcomes. And so just having a bit of a look at trauma in the context of the early years learning framework. So what I'm going to do is start off with a little video. And I think this is a nice way to start, just to help us understand how, what trauma is and how it affects the brain and what's going on there. So we'll start with that, and then we'll have a little bit of a chat when that's finished.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress response system is activated. The body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious, lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
I thought that was a nice way to start, because it talks a little bit about, how trauma affects the body, but also, and this is going to be the theme of the webinar, the importance of us as early childhood educators in being the support for the child and actually being able to do some quite dramatic work, which we're going to talk about. So we know that when children have been affected by relational trauma, so this is what we're talking about. So there's different types of trauma and like stress. So there's what's called positive when you're in it. I don't think there's anything positive about it, but it's about short term. So your alarm doesn't go off in the morning so that you're late, for getting to work, or you get caught in traffic on the way to work. So while that's happening, your heart rate increases, you have a bit of an adrenaline rush, you're sweaty, your hands are clenched, you're quite stressed. But it's short term, and when it's over, your body returns to normal. Your heart rate calms down a bit, you stop shaking, and it doesn't affect your brain development at all. It's just a normal part of adrenaline rush, a normal part of the stress of life. Then we've got what's called tolerable stress, and that's more long-term. That's, for me, I always think about when there's a long-term illness, or there's been a bereavement in the family, like the pain is much worse than the pain of the positive trauma of your alarm not going off in the morning, but it's still there, and it's very deep, and it's very hurtful, and it's very, you're under a lot of stress, but you have supportive people around you and it does ease with time. I don't say it eliminates if it's a bereavement, it's just easing with time. Again, this is not the sort of trauma that affects the brain. What that little video was talking about and what we're going to talk about in this webinar is the toxic stress that the video talked about, the relational trauma, the trauma where, in our case, young children, the children in our care are affected often, within the family, where there's the family members, the adults in the family are expected to be the supportive person for the child, and they're unable to do that for whatever reason, mental illness, drug abuse, whatever it is, they're unable to be the supportive person for the young child. So the young child is living through this kind of, nightmare of being on high alert. Their amygdala part of their brain is fully developed and they're on high alert looking for danger all the time, and they can't learn when they're in that high alert time. So trauma affects so much of who children are, how they see themselves, how they see others, how they understand themselves in the family, and how trauma blocks their ability to learn. So the impact of trauma, this long-term trauma on children, is quite substantial. And what it means is that when this little 3-year-old comes to your early learning service, and you look down on them, one of the things that we expect is when we look at a young child, they'll look back at us and think that we're going to be okay, that we'll be safe, that we'll be nurturing, that we'll be kind. And of course, they don't look at like that, at us, because we represent the other adults in their life who have not been kind and not been supportive and not been nurturing. So they look at us and see the adults that have caused their trauma. This is not us, of course. This is painful for us because we're lovely. We're lovely early childhood people. And of course, we're going to be supportive of these children, but they don't know that yet. So how they see us right from the start has an impact on how they behave towards us. So this is a slide I'm going to pop up a couple of times in the webinar. This slide is talking about, the messages that children get, what they sort of carry around with them. So they're saying things like, I can't trust adults to give me what I need. That the world is a scary place, that adults can't comfort me, that adults frighten me, and that I'm a bad person and I'm unlovable. So when they think that adults are inconsistent and untrustworthy, and they won't protect me, so therefore I need to protect myself. So they just keep leaving me. So I'm going to keep my distance from them. And they certainly don't comfort me or help regulate my arousal. And they can behave in practical and unpredictable ways, frightening and unpredictable ways. So with this, with this internal map that these children have, they find it really hard to explore the world and learn new things and cope with stress and make friends and play and have fun. So all the things that as an early childhood educator, we love working with young children about helping their curiosity, helping them explore the world. These children aren't in that place. And I think, that's the story for us, isn't it? It's awful, I think, for young children to, so young, to see themselves like this. And it certainly puts us in a place to make changes and differences. So just for brain information, if you're interested, this is where trauma affects the brain. So in the amygdala, so that's, the survival response center within the limbic lobe that becomes enlarged and more sensitive, the more it's activated through responding to threat. The hippocampus, so it consolidates memory by providing the context and sequential data. And this is very gorgeous for 3-year-olds who don't have a lot of memory anyway. So it's, put on your hat when you go out to play, put on your hat when you go out to play. And for these children older than 3, you're still needing to remind them about, basic things every day, because that's, it goes goes offline if trauma is overwhelmed, and it disrupts the whole cortex thinking. And then the bridge between, you know, left and right brain, and we're going to talk about all the things that we can do in the early childhood space. What it does to the brain is that children are on high alert the whole time. Their senses are aroused. It sets a scene for children to remember bad experiences and their responses and expect this to be the norm. So as I said to you before, they're going to look at you and not see the kind, loving person that you are, but see you as a threat, as the other adults in their life has been. And it's the same with the room, the interactions, the routines. They're just going to expect them to be painful or disruptive or hurt them in some way. It affects their empathy and their trust. They're not able to come to adults for support. It affects all parts of the child in my mind that makes them lovable. You know, their affectionateness, their quirkiness, their needing nurturing, they're being inquiring and being inquisitive. And so it actually makes a young child quite hard to like, because all the things that you love about the under fives are not in this child. It sculpts the brain by deforming and destroying neurons in the hippocampus, as I've said. It decreases the blood flow to the brain. It impairs the growth and activity of that bridge between the two, and sets off a ripple effect of hormonal changes. And being in survival mode, we're going to have another look at another little video in a minute. It restricts when you're in survival mode, when you're just sitting there, you know, like unable to learn, unable to play, unable to make friends, unable to think that you're even worthy of, you know, being here and making a friend. It restricts your motivation to be sociable. It restricts their capacity to connect to others in their sensory environment. It increases the experiences of fear, mistrust, or ambivalent interpersonal closeness, and results in difficulty in connecting with others. Here's the other little video that I wanted to show you. And in this video, he just talks about the two brains. He talks about like the learning brain, and then he talks about, the survival brain and the differences in that. And from this video, I want to talk to us about the way forward for us in the early childhood space. Let's have a listen.
Hey, welcome back. Today, I really wanted to think about what's the best way to teach teachers about trauma without getting them distracted with all the technical stuff, and what's the most important thing for them to understand and learn. And I thought that the best way to do it might be to just make a difference between a learning brain versus a brain in survival mode. And so we'll just call it learning brain versus survival brain. And this is the difference. So learning brain is this brain that's open to learning new information, and it's completely okay with ambiguity and grays and vagueness, and it sees the big picture. It like pulls back and is on the balcony, can look over the forest and figure out what's going on. On an emotional level, people in learning brain feel calm, peaceful, maybe a little excited about what they're about to learn, maybe a little playful and having fun too, and definitely curious. And they're not afraid of making mistakes because it's just part of the learning process. And so they're not really thinking about themselves. And they actually feel a little bit of confidence that if they just apply themselves, they might pick up what they're trying to learn. Now, survival brain, on the other hand, is completely different. It's hyper-focused on threat. It doesn't like ambiguity. It wants clear, hard facts. It thinks in black and white terms. It doesn't want anything to be gray at all. And then emotionally, you can imagine that survival brain makes people feel panicky, feel like a little obsessive and afraid of getting things wrong. And they don't feel calm and open to learning new things. They just want to get things over with. And people in survival brain also really don't like making mistakes, and they are afraid of looking stupid too. So students in survival brain don't want to be picked on. They don't want to raise their hand and ask questions and look stupid. And so these people are also filled with doubt about their own ability to learn stuff, and they're afraid that other people can see how stupid they really are. Now, it's really important to understand how learning brain and survival brain interact, because survival brain always trumps learning brain. And it makes sense, because survival brain is just trying to save your life. And so if it thinks that there's something dangerous happening, you better pay attention to it, right? But the tricky thing is that as survival brain stays on longer and longer, it's harder to get out of that. And it's harder to really go into learning brain. And the way I think about it is kind of like the myth of Sisyphus. You know, that guy who has to push a rock up a hill, and then every day it falls back down and he has to do it over and over again. Well, being in learning brain is like being up on the high parts of that mountain. You can see the expanse of what's going on, but it also takes a lot of work to be up there. And at any second, if you're not paying attention and putting effort into it, it's so easy to slip back into survival brain again. And that rock that Sisyphus is trying to push up, well, that's kind of like stress. And the more stressed you feel, the heavier and bigger that rock gets, and it just pushes you back into survival brain quicker. Now the kicker is that for traumatized people, stress is a really rigid and intense thing. And so with trauma, any little stress makes that rock grow way bigger than it normally would. And because people with trauma misperceive ambiguous situations as threatening and stressful, that rock just stays big all the time. Now the good news is that the more you control stress, well, the easier it is to be in learning brain, right? Because that rock is a lot smaller. And what I really want to highlight for teachers is that the best way to keep students in learning brain goes back to why I spent so much time talking about attachment. Students best learn when they feel like they're safe and supported by the adults around them. So it's kind of like a baby elephant. You know how like on those nature shows, the baby elephant is like playing with leaves or exploring a tree or something like that and having a lot of fun. And the only reason why they can do that is because there's a whole group of mama elephants around that baby protecting it and looking out for danger. So a kid with trauma or who's stuck in survival brain, it's kind of like that baby elephant who doesn't have protective adults around them. They can't play and learn because they're way too focused looking out for threat and danger. So this is why I really believe that the most important thing that schools need to focus on, way more important than any kind of techniques or curricula, is really whether or not they are creating that environment where students feel like they're surrounded by these big mama elephants who are going to protect them and watch out for them and make them safe. And when students have that, I bet you it unlocks their curiosity, their eagerness to learn, and play as a way to learn. So I hope that's helpful. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Hey, welcome back. Today,
So that little video was set up for schools and school teachers, but I just think it's so relevant to us in the early childhood space. And I like you to keep that image of the little playful elephant surrounded by, you know, the supportive parent elephants, because I think as early childhood educators, that's us. We're going to be the supportive elephants around the baby elephant to allow them to play, to allow them not to be looking out for threats all the time, to trust that we will look out for the threats and that they will be safe and be able to learn. So I see our job as rewiring the brain, and due to the plasticity of the brain, which we can talk about later, you know, we are able to support the child to actually be able to learn. But I think before that, and I think I liked what he said about, you know, before you even think about, you know, strategies or curricula, let's think about connection. Let's think about building a relationship with this child. So the better integrated the different parts of the brain are, the more adaptive we can be to our environment. And developmental trauma is disintegrative, disconnecting and disruptive to both the brain and the body. And so this is where we have to recognise, I think, that when children are behaving interestingly or badly, that they're actually trying to tell us something. There's something going on. And I think one of the lovely things about understanding brain development and trauma is the relationship, you know, is us as early childhood educators understanding that when young children misbehave, they're trying to tell us something. When young children misbehave, it's because something's happened to them. In the case of relational trauma, in the case of these little children that we're talking about today, it's about their brain has been wired differently due to the experiences that they've had before they come to us. But the good news is we can rewire the brain. We can change the images that children have of themselves, and we'll talk about that as we go on. So let's look at the early years learning framework, and then let's put what we've already looked at around trauma, let's put this into the context. So the early years learning framework for Australia says that diversity in family life means that children experience belonging, being and becoming in many different ways. They bring their diverse experiences, perspectives, expectations, and knowledge and skills to their learning. Now, with our gorgeous children affected by relational trauma, they'll be bringing their survival brain, won't they, to the experience. They won't be bringing their learning brain. They haven't developed their learning brain because, as we saw in the little video, the survival brain always trumps the learning brain. And these little munchkins don't have a learning brain. They're only bringing their survival brain to the experience of being, belonging and becoming. They struggle to learn at all. So our role is to connect before correct, and I'm going to talk about that, to build a supportive environment, to be those parent elephants, to support the child to feel safe enough. Only when a child feels safe can they start to learn. I think for some of our children affected by relational trauma, in the year they are with you, if that's what it is, then I think, one of the goals would be about making connection with this child, helping that child change how they feel about themselves, how they see themselves and the world. So the early years framework, the belonging, being and becoming, and I'm calling it the 3 R's. It's all about relationships, relationships, relationships. So relationships are crucial to the sense of belonging. Belonging is central to the being and becoming, in that it shapes who children are and who they can become. And being, childhood is a time to be, to seek and to make meaning of the world, and building and maintaining relationships with others, and becoming, children's identities, knowledge, understanding, capacities, skills and relationships are shaped by many different events and circumstances. So it's, for me, for children affected by relational trauma, it's all about the 3 R's: relationship, relationship, relationship. So we're going to have a look at these relationships under the different headings, the 3 areas in the early years learning framework. So let's just have a look at belonging, the relationships within belonging. So without a sense of belonging and feeling of connection, children can't learn, can't connect. For these children, a realistic goal would be that the child feels connected to the staff, and not afraid of you, and that they recognise that they're safe when they come with you. Some of the images of us, we want to change some of the images of us. And it's all about developing and supporting safe, positive and nurturing relationships and connection in children's lives. We as the educators may very well be the only people to provide this for children affected by trauma. So let's have a look at this slide again, and let's have a look at, in the sense of relationships and belonging, the sort of things that we can start changing. So how can we help the child feel like they have a sense of belonging in the service and with us? So perhaps we can start changing some of the things like adults cannot comfort me. I can't trust adults to give me what I need. Maybe they're the messages that we can start changing by our behaviour and our responses to the child affected by relational trauma. We know that secure relationships is central to the development of a positive sense of self, empathic and sensitive interaction, adaptive and flexible emotional regulation, belonging, being, becoming. A secure relationship is central to how a child perceives themselves. So we can start changing some of those images that the child has of themselves and the world, how they feel in their body, so that they can focus their attention, so they're able to learn, that they can feel safe and secure in the presence of others. They can act and behave appropriately in the world. and think and interact, with the world and manage their feelings. So we're looking at predictability, consistency, connecting, and being present for the child. Dan Hughes will talk about when working with a child affected by relational trauma, when we're, at the beginning of the relationship, sometimes the best you can do is sit with that child in their pain, sit with the child in their dysregulation, sit with the child in their interesting behavior, just sit with them, because the first message that you can give them is, other adults have let you down, but I won't. I'm in here for the long haul. No matter what you throw at me, I will stay. We mentioned this earlier, but this is where the quote came from. It's connection, not control, that cultivates cooperation, trust, love, resilience, and independence. Connection is at the heart of relationships. So connection before correction. So what we're learning about children affected by relational trauma is that if we focus on the connection, if we focus on the correction before the connection, then we escalate the behaviour. If we find authentic connections, the child's behaviour will start to correct. But it's a long project and children need connection. They've had 3 years of disconnection, so they're not going to be trusting you to provide that connection. Building relationships with our infants and children, learn their stories, help them to make sense of their stories, and repair. So if you make a mistake with the child, if you are dysregulated yourself and you escalate the behaviour, make the repair. Say you're sorry. So that's having a look at what that might look like. And that's, I should say now, let's have a look at what relationships look like in being. And again, we've got, I should just go back to here. Again, we're just having a look at, the importance of relationships. Continuing on what we said before, as early childhood educators, we can change the child's view of themselves and support how they see the world. As it's a kind place, and the relationships with others can be safe. So looking at this little picture again, can we help them with being that the world is a safe place now? We're hoping through relationships we can talk about that the children can see us as trustworthy, and that we can be supportive, and that we can comfort them, and that in the early childhood space at least, then the world is no longer a scary place, but it's a safer place. So one of the ways I think in being is, using play. And our CEO at the Australian Childhood Foundation talks about play being a system of spontaneous, non-stereotypical, intrinsically pleasurable activities and orientations free from fear and anxiety. But what we absolutely know is that gorgeous children affected by relational trauma will not find play pleasurable. They'll be scared of it. They won't understand it. They won't have experienced it. They'll see it as a threat, and they won't engage, or if they do engage, they won't continue to engage unless we can help them make a difference. Understand children through play. So how can we support children? One of the things that I wanted to talk about, Lisa Dion, D-I-O-N, is worth having a bit of a look at her work from a clinical point of view, working with children. And she says some lovely things about the playroom, particularly. She sort of says that the most important toy in the playroom is actually you. And exploration and play are the children's measure for sense of safety. So we can actually see how children are traveling through their play. So how can adults help children, support children's play? We can help children feel safe and be safe in the play situation. And I was thinking, about how we understand children's play, how they develop play. And they start off with solo play and then, parallel play. This is sort of general, and then cooperative play. But these little Vegemites don't even start with solo play. They don't even know how to do that. So I feel like we're supporting them, from no play into going into solo play. And then maybe, at the end of the year, we've got a little bit of parallel play, and that would not be a bad outcome. So provide positive role modelling, provide a time and place, provide, appropriate activities, follow the child's lead if the child is in a position to lead, provide opportunities for children to play with others. But with our little munchkins, I think it's offering them the opportunity just to play, just to experience play. And if they're learning, if they're coming to us with their stressful brain, their high alert brain, how can we support them to lower that amygdala, to recognize they're in a safe place to be able to play, and to understand that play is, a pleasurable experience. So I think that's, they're the sort of things that we're having a look at with sort of children's play. How can we use play to help children feel about who they are? And of the 3 B's, the final one, of course, is becoming. So let's have a look at relationships in becoming. So again, let's think about our traumatized, what's it deciding to do now? Let's have a think about our traumatized child. Here he is again. Through the other, becoming and being, belonging and being, we're hoping that children can change their self-talk to that they can trust adults, that the world is a safe place, that we can comfort them. And now with becoming, how can we work on children's identities? How can we support them to think differently about themselves? So going from I'm a bad person to I'm a lovable person, I'm a likable person, I am okay, I can be loved, and I can be nurtured. So I think with becoming, we're supporting children to change who they think about themselves, that change their self-talk, change their identity. So play comes again into the story. So here's just a little slide on curiosity, play, and pleasure, and just having a look at that. Our children, one of the things that is affected in their brain development is lack of curiosity, lack of exploration, because when they have done that in their trauma space, then, it hasn't been acknowledged as an okay thing, and it hasn't been a pleasurable thing. So I think some of our work in the early childhood space is to help children be curious and to explore safely. So the cycle starts with curiosity, it drives the play produces pleasure. That's our outcome. That's what we want. We want the children to, enjoy an experience that we would call play, get something, warm inside them from the activity so that they feel safe to experience it again. With repetition becomes, there's mastery, just repetitions. One of the stories we talk about when we're not talking about relationships. It's one of the stories that we talk about in the early childhood space with children affected by trauma, like same repetition, and I'll talk about this in a second. So curiosity is a neurobiological feature and it drives play. So we're wanting to support children to feel that it's okay to be curious, that it's okay to explore. And play, and safe and supportive play, is a really good place to start. So how do you build relationships, be playful, be empathic, engage, be curious, to support children to be curious and be accepting? And I think one of the checklists to start off with is about ourselves. How are we going with these children affected by relational trauma and all the little interesting behaviours they bring with that? Children who are affected by relational trauma, whose adults around them are also affected by trauma usually, and also dysregulated and not being able to be strong adults. So how do we, as the early childhood educator, make sure that we the strong adult. So we need to be professionals who are strong in our skin, is what I say. We need to be professionals who are confident in what we're doing so that we can be secure and strong for the children. It's about looking after yourself. It's about, and Dan Hughes and others would say that, you know, when you're working with a child affected by relational trauma, the beginning of the connection is just being with them in their pain, like just being with them, staying with them. But it's really important when the child goes home, when you finished your session, that you, as he would say, change your shoes, put your own shoes back on to go home. You need to be able to distance yourself from the child once you've gone home. You need to be able to take care of yourself in the home environment, not think about the child, not bring the child's story home, because we want you to be the next day as strong as you can be to support the child. Children need strong, stable, secure adults. And in the early childhood space, that's what we need to be. So relationship is about being playful with the child. And this will be a new experience for them. They might not have had anybody be playful with them before. Be understanding, be accepting, being empathic, be curious with them. But I think accepting the child and their behavior. Like, no matter what you throw at me, as I said before, I am the strong adult. I am going to be here for you. And I'm going to show you this is not what you say to the child, it's what you say to yourself. I'm going to show you a different sort of adult. I'm going to show you that adults can be kind, that adults can be caring, that adults can be safe. So in the framework, we've got some learning outcomes, and they fit beautifully, I think, with how I would set a goal for a child in my service that's come to me with toxic stress, with relational trauma. So I would want them to have a strong sense of identity, but I'm wanting them to have a strong sense of a positive identity. I am lovable. I am okay. I can be loved. I can play with others. We want children who are connected with and contribute to their world. For me, I just want the child to go back to, line 1. Children have a strong sense of identity. I want children to feel good about themselves. Only when they feel good about themselves can they start to contribute and connect to the world. We want our children to have a strong sense of well-being, and it leads back to, doesn't it, how we're responding towards them, how they see our space. Remember those elephant parents surrounding the little playful elephant, the baby elephant? We want to be those parent elephants around the child, that the child can play and learn and be a child, knowing that we will be looking out for any trouble. We will be keeping them safe so that they can have that strong sense of well-being. We want children who are confident and involved learners. Now, for me, I would be going before, the connection before the correction. We'll be looking at confident children, and hopefully there'll be a little bit of time where they can actually, feel safe enough to learn something. But for me, it would be about having a strong identity, feeling good about themselves, feeling good with me as the early childhood educator, feeling safe in the space that I provide them, feeling confident, and then, able to communicate perhaps verbally rather than punching me out, their needs. So being able to trust that when they come to me for support, that I will be able to provide it. So I think I like that the early years learning framework, learning outcomes fit with this child themselves being strong in themselves, having a strong sense of self, because it's only when they're feeling safe about all of those things can they learn. Learning, it's almost like I would be putting learning right at the end of my goal for the child. It'll be more about how can I support the child to feel good about themselves so that they feel safe to learn, rather than, have they recognized their colors yet? You know, can they sit on the mat without hurting anybody else? Those kind of things. I'd be like, let's put those aside and let's just build up the child first, because I believe that once the other things in place, that then children will feel safe to sit on the mat, or, you know, safe to learn, and won't need to be showing their dysregulation through their behavior. The neuroplasticity, and I spoke about this earlier. So the joy of working with children affected by relational trauma is, although the brain is malleable for the trauma, it's also malleable for, you know, repair. And our job as early childhood educators, I believe, is to support children to feel good about themselves, to feel good about us, and to feel safe in the space that we provide for them. So it's about reframing our approach. I think it's when kids feel right, they act right. So I rather like, you know, rather than asking, what are you doing? How can I stop it? We're actually, you know, wondering, I think, what are you trying to tell me through your behavior? And what do you need? We're wondering, what are you trying to tell me, and what do you need from me? Rather than bad behavior equals punishment, we're thinking bad behavior equals you trying to tell me something. I need to try and understand what it is that's going on for you. And the tricky part is, of course, they can't tell you what's going on for them. You know, they've had a trigger, they're not even sure what it's about. But it's the response from us that's going to make a difference. No matter what you throw at me, I'm going to be the strong adult for you. We want to build predictability. And I'm going to talk just quickly about predictability and transitions, and, you know, predictability and routines. I just put this little cartoon up. Our lives are so predictable. Oh, I knew you were going to say that. So focus on creating an environment that is predictable and familiar. And I say to early childhood educators, it's like, you know, boring 101, you know, like always greet the child the same way. And I'm saying to early childhood educators, don't change your dress, don't, you know, dye your hair, don't do anything different. You need to look like, be like, the same as, for the child's stability. I'm only joking, you can actually change clothes and your hair. Focusing on creating an environment that is predictable to the child. So, you know, greeting the child the same each day, maybe if possible, it's the same person greeting the child. Always prepare the child for what comes up next. Some of these are exactly what you would do for any child in the under 5 space, but with child affected by relational trauma, you might need to do it many more times. Establish a supportive pattern of one-to-one communication with the child. Be particularly sensitive to transition experiences, I'm going to talk about next. Think about your service for the young child. Are there things that you do every day? You know, same time, same thing. Perhaps you're at the table first, then you go onto the mat, then maybe you go outside, like same. Now, I can't tell you how important same is for children affected by relational trauma. You have routines to keep all children safe, and they particularly keep children safe who are affected by relational traumas, just to know, you know, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Because when you think about how their brain's been developing, the brain will not be developed with, you know, this happened, you know, I am upset and then I am comforted, I am hungry and then I'm fed. That's not how their brain's been wired. Their brain has been wired in a chaotic environment, and so they're going to not understand this same, but it's so important for children to recognize this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Your routines, why do you have them? You have them to support children to feel safe, to support brain connections, to feel safe. And it's more important for our children affected by relational trauma, you know, same song when they come to sit on the mat, or, you know, the same puppet when they're going off to lunch, whatever it is. Consistency in the carer, if possible. Now, I know in the early childhood space, often that's not possible. And one of the things that we talk about is, you know, is it possible to have more than one early childhood educator that can be responsible for the child? Is that at all possible to have? And I know it's really difficult with agency staff and staff coming and going, but let's have a think about in your service, how can you have, you know, consistent adults for the child? Traumatized children will start to rely on the safe adult when the safe adult is responding to them all the time in the same way. So just being that safe, strong person. So the neuroception of safety, predictability is the other thing I was going to talk about. Predictability, and we're going to talk about that in relation to transitions. So Steve Porges talks about the removal of threat is not the same as the presence of safety. One of the things when working with children affected by relational trauma, we do not know what feelings they are bringing into the centre in the morning. Sometimes their behaviour is very obvious that they're dysregulated and something has happened. But even though we know that we're safe and that the room's safe, what we don't know is how safe the child's feeling within themselves. Like what's their stomach telling them? Have they got butterflies? Are they feeling ill? Is their adrenaline on like high alert? Has something happened? Has something triggered something? So managing safety and connection. So managing transitions. So routines, predictability, same. And I just wanted to have this little discussion about transitions. So we've worked out that children affected by relational traumas are extremely triggered by movement, moving from the table to the mat, from the mat to the outside to the bathroom, all the things that you do in the early childhood space. They can actually see transitions as a threat. They can lose their sense of safety, and they may revert to like the survival mode, that sort of stressful brain. So how can you help children to think, to feel safe during transitions? So maybe it's about a little exercise, list all the transitions you expect children to do in one ordinary day. And we've had some early childhood educators in Victoria just doing this little activity and being really shocked when we think about, and there's a little study that's being done on a 2-year-old boy, and counting how many transitions and how soon he became dysregulated. This is a child without any trauma going on. How soon he was dysregulated because of all the changes. So young little munchkin at 2, mum gets him up in the morning. On this particular day, his mum and another mum take the children to a childcare centre, so they swap. So this is the morning where he has breakfast with his mum, but he goes in the neighbour's car. So that's the first transition. He's not going into his car, he's going into the neighbour's car, and then the 2 children travel to the early childhood centre together. When they get there, it's early, and so children are put into a room together. So next transition, so within sort of, an hour of being awake, he's now moved from home to the neighbour's car and then into, they call it family grouping, so into a room with other children, different ages. And then at 9 o'clock when all the staff are on, excuse me, the child then moves into his room for his age group. On this particular day, his staff, the leader of the room is not there. It's a new person. It's a person who's come in for the day. So under 2 hours, we've now got this little person with 4 transitions. By this stage, he's becoming a little bit dysregulated. And then I think when the new teacher came in, instead of his, safe teacher, he lost the plot altogether. So it's just having a think about. And so I've had early childhood educators count how many times we move children, from one room to another, from a staff member to another. When the staff go on to lunch, what does that mean for the child? Does the staff member say goodbye to the child before they go on their lunch break? Like, what's going on? So it's just about, so how many of the transitions are essential? Do all children have to be on the mat at the same time? Can some of them stay at the table if they're engaged in doing something? And how can you provide safe passage for children through the transition? Is it about a safe person? Is it about a safe activity? Is it about a safe place? Is it about, and we've had children like carry like a little teddy bear or something, a safe thing to help them move from one place to another when they're finding all those sort of transitions are stressful. So just having a look at transitions. So just have a think about it. I think personally, in my own experience as an early childhood educator, I've not thought enough about how many transitions we expect children to move through. And for children who are traumatised by transitions anyway, why are we moving them when maybe we don't have to? can our little child who sat in the foyer for the first term and is now, you know, ventured into the big playroom, but who now sits with their back against the wall at the table watching everybody, can that not be okay? At least that is a step from the foyer into the playroom. But now they're not moving onto the mat and they're not doing other things. Is that okay? And I'm thinking maybe it is. Maybe, you know, like have a think about the big step the child has already made. Do all children need to sit on the mat? Do all children need to go outside? And I know there's staff ratio and other things to think about, but just put this up there with sort of things to think about. For these children, be a safe person, be safe in you know, be strong in your skin, provide the safe environment, provide the same repetition. When children, like we talked about through play, learn that a play experience that's repeated over and over again, that gives them pleasure in their heart, they feel brave enough to have another go at it. It's like repetition helps to repair the brain. So to finish, we're looking at challenging and reconstructing the child's model of relationships, from chaos and uncertainty to connection and learning. For these children who start life, we know it's so unfair the way that they've started their life. Our job is to rewire the brain by providing connection, providing safety, providing support, so the children can feel okay about themselves. That's your major goal. Like, how can I help my child move from being dysregulated and fearful and unhappy to actually feeling in our space with us anyway? We can't do anything about anything external, but at least with us, that they, you know, feel safe. You might get a smile, you know, if the child comes in February, by October, you might actually get a smile from them. They might, you know, come into the room without being dysregulated and traumatized. So I think, you know, small steps. Don't think that they're not goals. They certainly are goals for children affected by trauma. Can they come into my room? Can they let me sit near them without being, you know, upset? Can I, you know, support them in their play? Will they let me play with them? You know, like, what will they enable me to do so I can keep this connection going, start and begin a relationship with this child? Most important thing are the 3 R's: relationship. If at the end of a year you can say that the child, remember where they were at the start, but the child now comes in with a smile on their face, they're happy to leave their parent and come into the room, they watch the other children without hurting them, they join in an activity or watch all activities, not a bad outcome. You've done some major rewiring of the brain. So this only happens when you're able to be, as I say, strong in your skin, confident in what you're doing, and in there for the long haul for the child affected by relational trauma. And I hope that this webinar's come to an end, but I'm hoping it's given you a little bit of how the child affected by relational trauma fits with the, you know, the learning outcomes and the context of the early years learning framework for Australia. So I hope that was helpful, and thanks for your attention.